Hi, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Chris, and this is Business by the Books.
Hi, welcome to Business by the Books, where we believe that leaders are readers. So if you are not reading, you are not leading. Today's book, this is episode 9, is Our Iceberg is Melting. And there's a really cute little picture on the cover.
Who didn't like penguins?
With penguins, exactly. We love penguins. And it is by, and I may butcher this because I believe that their names are German, but it is John Kotter and Holger Rathgeber. And it was published in 2005. So tell me about the penguins.
So this is good. It's a neat story. It's set with penguins, as we joked about who doesn't like penguins.
Yep.
But the concept is the penguins are on an iceberg and it's melting. And a couple of people realize it, but most people don't want to admit that the iceberg is melting. And so it's a fictional story, obviously, about how to address change in an organization that needs to be changed when people don't want to change. And so anyway, it's funny, I've had this book for years and set on my shelf, and so I decided to read it, probably about 6 weeks ago. And
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh.
so relatively fresh. I mean, I wish I'd read it. Wish I'd read it when it was written.
Yeah.
But it's got some good things that we're going to talk about in this podcast about if you're part of an organization that's struggling, and how do you create change and create kind of a sense of urgency in order to change.
Yeah. So is it literally penguins, or is it a parable about people represented?
No, it's about penguins. I mean, the penguins can talk. It's like, I know you like
okay,
Disney, so it's like a Disney movie. But I mean, and we have a couple of books in this series that are fables, and this one happens to have penguins.
Oh,
you
that's
know,
so fun.
well, and it's kind of funny because you think a lot about icebergs and you think about penguins being cute and kind of moving around. But if you were a group of penguins on an iceberg that was melting, that'd be a bad deal.
Yeah, not fun.
No, not fun. And it's not fun to be part of an organization that's struggling either.
Yeah. So kind of what is the journey that these penguins go on, aside from the fact that this iceberg, that the iceberg is melting? How do they handle that, and what is their journey?
So kind of what happens is there's like one penguin, and he's kind of the visionary guy, and he sees that the iceberg is melting. And so if you're someone who's an organization and you see that there's problems, it's hard to convince people, So usually visionaries they struggle because they see that there's a problem. So the key is, how do you convince people? Okay, so there's this penguin, and so some of the characters, I'll just throw some names out. We'll talk about them. There's Fred, Alice, Louis, Buddy, the Professor, and No. and so the main character is Fred, and so he kind of sees that there's some issues. And so he's got to convince somebody, and the person he goes to is Alice. And Alice is kind of like the group leader, and she's the deep thinker. And when she speaks, people listen to her. And so what happens is, Fred really understands what's going on. And one of the things, and I'm kind of jumping down a little bit, but the normal process with the penguins is, and on page 33 it talked about, it says the penguin leadership determined their home was melting. Alice cleared her throat loudly, then spoke. When we have a problem, forming a committee and trying to protect our colony from unpleasant news is what we normally do. But this is far, far from a normal problem.
That's so funny.
So Alice has to kind of be a voice of reason, and she's the spokesperson. So part of this, and we'll talk about, the authors have put an 8-step process together. And so what we're going to talk about is, what does that process do, and how do you create a sense of change and a sense of urgency? And to be honest with you, I mean, you look at what's going on right now, there's companies that have been in business for years, but because of COVID and the low price of oil here in the energy industry, there's companies going out of business.
Yeah.
And to some degree, Ashley, the reason why is they're doing the same same thing that they've always done. And Einstein said that problems, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. So you gotta change things up in order for things to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. So aside from Fred and Alice, kind of what are the roles of Lewis, Buddy, the professor, and No-No throughout this story?
So let's talk about No-No.
I know, I was going to say, that name is just intriguing, and I would never want to name my child No-No.
Yeah.
But...
I don't, maybe it's a foreign language, but it was spelled N-O-N-O.
Yeah.
And so No-No, if you're listening to our podcast and you're listening to us sequentially, you heard the 5 voices. No-No is the guardian. Okay. And so he's, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. And one of the things I shared in the first episode, which was the 5 voices, was I find that extremely frustrating. I can't stand it. And one of the books we're going to talk about later is being an optimist, and being a definite optimist means that you see things as you want them to be and you're optimistic about that. But No, in every situation was, our iceberg is not melting. No, we're not going to leave the iceberg. We're going to keep doing the same things that we've always done. And the problem is, if you have enough no-nos in a group, and even after, the stories actually moved to another iceberg, okay, that they got everybody, they mobilized it, and, it's kind of like Moses leading the out of the Egyptians, leading the Hebrew people out. They all load up in their colony and they go to a new iceberg, but No-No's still like, why are we doing this? And so to me, he was a favorite character just because he represents people that don't want to change.
Yeah.
Now, the professor was funny because he was a guardian, and he always had these great theories. And, you're in college, and you know how some professors, not all professors, but some can, they kind of pie in the sky.
Well, it's funny. It's not the business professors. It's all of the other professors.
Exactly. It's the
business
chemistry,
professors are the fun
the biology,
Yeah.
the engineering, the physics, anything related to science, and probably sometimes the more inclined you are to be mathematical, probably the more you are to be the professor. So the professor here was, he always had a logical reason why they wouldn't do things, and he pontificated, and Alice did a great job managing him, because he would stand up and make these broad speeches, and everybody kind of he's kind of like the owl, he's the wise old owl, but Alice had this way of just kind of getting him to shut up.
Man.
So she was the key. I mean, without Alice in this story, they would have stayed on the iceberg and they all would have died.
So is Fred the first character in this story to recognize the problem and bring it to Alice's attention?
He is.
I was going to say that's kind of interesting, and I like how they separate and differentiate the concept from Fred being kind of the pioneer and Alice being the leader, recognizing that you can still be a leader without being in charge and call out a problem, bring it to somebody's attention, but you have to have somebody in the higher up position to allow it to come to fruition.
So there were 2 more characters. Lewis and he was probably the least elaborated character, but he was kind of like the president, and he's kind of like the person in charge, and everybody kind of respected him. But Alice was kind of the one who was willing to move everybody forward. But Lewis was the wise old leader, and he realized the role that Alice had. Now, the other character is Buddy, and we know a Buddy.
We do.
Okay, and Buddy is, you can't be a mean guy and be a Buddy. And so this guy was literally Buddy Powers. Buddy, I know you're going to watch this, so we'll make sure that you get a shout out. But everybody loves Buddy Powers.
Yep.
And in this story, Buddy Powers could be in the story. So he was kind of the sales guy. He got everybody together. Everybody liked him. He made things fun. And Alice used him, not in a use sense, but she engaged him in a way that he was the communicator. And so he created excitement about, hey, we're going to go do this new thing, and got everybody riled up about it. And he was critically important, because that rah-rah person is the one that really makes the difference. And you don't have to be that in your organization, but someone needs to be.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, exciting. Yeah, because when somebody gets you passionate and excited, I mean, we're seeing that now in the midst of all of our social things, right? We have people who are passionate and who are excited, and that is, in a sense, what causes a lot of things to happen. So, obviously, this is more of an organizational sense.
Well, and one of the things too, Ashley, is organizations. They become successful, and so as they, like Andy Grove, I don't know if you know who he is. He was one of the founders of Intel. Oh. And so they're basically 3 men, and he wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. And so the concept was, Intel is one of the most successful companies that's ever existed in the history of mankind. A lot of our electronics that we have is a result of advances technologically because of Intel. But Andy's philosophy was you've always got to be advancing. And just because you were successful yesterday, and actually success can become a liability, right? If you're comfortable and you're doing the same thing you were doing 5 years ago or 10 or 15 or 20, you may find yourself being displaced. And Alan Greenspan called that creative destruction in his biography or autobiography, is that what you do today is going to be replace somebody else. So I'll give you a good example. When I was a little boy, if you went into an office building, a couple things are happening. A lot of people smoked. Smoked cigarettes. But then the other thing was people used typewriters. I mean, today, nobody uses typewriters.
So those in antique shops.
Yeah, so in 1975, if you were a typewriter repairman, you had a booming business, right? I mean, and you'd been going, and there was no reason to believe something wasn't going to change, except when you got to the early 1980s, people started using word processors. So when I started at A&M, I remember I had a little word processor, it was like a typewriter, Yeah, and so it was like a little electric typewriter, but within 2 years, my junior year at A&M, 1989, got a 386, and it was a screaming machine, and we did all of our reports on a computer. So from that point forward, that thing was a boat anchor. We got rid of it.
I know. The only time I think I know of having used a typewriter is like for fun crafts and making it look cool and retro.
I think Mommy's got one downstairs, but it's an antique.
Yeah, it's an antique, exactly.
So that's a little subtle example, but a lot of the books that we're doing in this series are written by people that like we did Mr. Cruz and Bluebell. And so Bluebell has advanced. They're not doing the exact same thing that they were doing in 1950. I mean, they're still making ice cream, but the way that they communicate with people is different than what they did 25 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, we'll kind of keep talking about a couple different things, but one of the main things that I want to focus on is this 8-step process that the authors, put together for us.
And they kind of put forward this 8-step process throughout the parable of the penguins. Okay, cool, awesome. Yeah. So take us through the 8-step process.
Let's go through it. Okay, so I had to write these down because I don't have them memorized. So this is on page 129 through 134. So you set the stage and you create a sense of urgency. Okay, and so you don't want people panicking and screaming and going crazy, but you need to help people understand that if we're on the iceberg and it's melting, we have a defined period of time before there's nothing left. And so you have to help people understand, because without a sense of urgency, people just keep doing the same old thing, right? So that's the first thing. And then the second step is you pull together the guiding team and they decide what to do. So if you're leading an organization that's got, say, 200 people, and you can't get all 200 people together and say, hey, we're going to go do this. You need a group of people, and the authors did a great job in looking at Fred, Alice, Lewis, Buddy, and Professor and No-No. They kind of formed this committee, and they had a general consensus, this is what we're going to do. But see, they even included the professor, as part of this group, even though he was kind of the guardian and kind of against it. So this core group kind of sets the vision for where they're going. And then the third thing is you develop a change vision and a strategy to make it happen.
Yeah, it's crucial.
It is crucial. You have to have a plan.
Yeah.
Because kind of going to the 5 voices. So if you've got a group of 200 people, odds are you have all 5 of those voices. That you have to somehow connect with all those people. So the beauty, if you get a really good team and they have all the personality types, all the 5 voices, they're going to be able to communicate with their like-minded people.
Yeah. It's been interesting in the midst of having to deal with coronavirus stuff. I'm a leader in Christian business leaders at A&M. And so with our organization, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get together as a staff and figure out what are we going to be doing moving forward. Now, if somebody just asked me as a single individual to make that decision, what's the plan moving forward, I think I would really struggle with that. But I've been very fortunate to be put with a co-directing partner as well as this awesome staff where we all have different voices, all different perspectives, and we can generate and bounce ideas off of each other to make a plan moving forward. Because there's no way that I as an individual could come up with that. So I like how they put emphasis on putting a guiding team together and then developing that together as well.
Yeah, and that's really it's really important in a large organization to have a group of leaders who work very well together, and you don't always have to agree. Yeah. Right? I mean, to be honest with you, it's probably better that you disagree, but you learn how to do it in a professional way where people feel comfortable sharing. And one of the books that we're going to do coming up is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And so you build this cohesive unit where you professionally engage each other and you disagree, but when you walk out of the room, everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
And once again, this book did a great job really talking about that. So once you develop a vision, a change vision, and a strategy to make things happen, then the 4th step is you communicate for understanding and buy-in. And so, if people are uncomfortable with what you're doing, but you take some time, and it's probably going to take a series of meetings, and you may have to do videos and different emails, and you may have to have kind of a campaign, if you will, to help people understand where you're going. Over time, if you've done it the right way and you've anticipated all those questions, you'll get buy-in. And a little bit of a rabbit trail, one of the things that I do, that we do at ADV is we work with new technology companies. And so sometimes it's very difficult for the oil and gas industry, because we tend to be conservative, is to adopt new technologies. And so it's the same kind of process when you're rolling something new out. You've got to get people to buy into the idea. And you think about all the things that, like cars. You think about the automobile, people just kind of viewed it as just another way to pull a buggy, right?
Yeah.
Airplanes, all the technology, the phones, microphones, lights, all these things that we take for granted every day. It was a new idea, and somebody had to be a visionary and make things happen.
Yeah.
So what I like about this book is those of us who are kind of change agents and trying to create change, in organizations and society. It's got a very good platform. You don't have to just kind of make stuff up. And then the 5th thing is you empower others to act. And so that's the 5th step. So that's really important, because once again, if you've got buy-in, and then at that point, if you've got people who feel empowered, to act, then things just naturally move forward. So, in this book here, they had to decide to leave the iceberg. And it took time, but once that happened, then people actually were excited about it, and they wanted to do it. And Dwight D. Eisenhower had a great quote that relates to that. He said, "The art of leadership is getting other people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it."
Yeah.
Right, and that's great. And I've been around a couple of great leaders, and you meet with them, and you watch them, and they get excited about stuff, and then you walk out of the meeting, and you wind up doing what they wanted you to do, but you're just as enthusiastic as they are, or perhaps even more.
Yeah, well, and that ties in, I just like the flow of that, from going from step 4 to communicate for understanding and buy-in, and then the 5th step, the empowering others to act, that is the fruition of that 4th step. Once you have the buy-in, enabling people to act, and I love getting people excited about acting.
So one of the things that was interesting that they did was produce short-term wins. And so one of the things that they did, and it kind of reminded me when in the Old Testament, when they sent the spies in to the Promised Land, and you remember they all went in, and then they came back, and most of them were no-nos, right?
Yep.
But Joshua and Caleb were like, "Hey, God's behind us. We can take these people." And God obviously wasn't very happy, because the no-nos were louder than the yes guys. So what it said here is that you want to look for short-term wins. So what they did was the Penguins sent a scout team, and so they were the good swimmers, and they went and let them go find some new icebergs, and then they would come back and they provided that information. But they got people excited because it helped them realize beyond where their iceberg was, there were other icebergs that they could go to. So it was kind of a short-term emotional win. And, you and I are talking about today, a lot of life is emotion. Like if you watch a good movie, there's just things that happen. If you read a good book, if you're with someone that you really respect, there's these endorphins and dopamines and all these chemicals that basically come up in your body, and they make you want to do things. Yeah. And it's the same thing when you're trying to get people to change. You've got to go through that process. And then the last thing is, don't let up, make it stick. And man, that's the hard part. So you've run like 25 miles in a 26-mile marathon. You're almost to the end, but you got to keep going that extra mile. And a lot of times, in a lot of organizations, is they get to the point where everybody's just frustrated and they just stop. And it's that extra little part that keeps going. And that's where leadership's important. And so kind of in this story, Alice was a key that she's like, look, this is what we're going to do. And she kind of orchestrated this whole thing. But if Alice quit, the whole thing comes apart, and everybody stays in the iceberg and dies. Yeah. And then the last thing is create a new culture. And so what's really interesting, if you do this the right way and you take your organization to a place that they've never been before, that when you get through it, and it's painful, people get hurt. Some people may leave.
Yep.
They may not want to be part of your organization anymore. But when you come through that experience on the other side, you've got a new culture, and people are excited. And then the next time you need to change, because it's part of your culture, okay, then you can go forward and you can do new things.
Makes it easier.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it easier. So there's a couple of messages. If you're building an organization, this is a good book to read so that you build this concept of, hey, our iceberg may be melting, and so we need to change from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. If you're part of an organization that's been around for a long time and you're starting to struggle, or you sense struggle, or maybe people have left your iceberg or whatever, mm-hmm. and you're the one who's left, read this book and look at this process, and you may be the person, like Fred, that kind of says, hey, something's wrong with our iceberg. You're not the person who's going to make the change, but you've got to get the leadership on your side. And that's extremely hard. Mm-hmm. I would say that's the hardest part. If you see something that's wrong in an organization and you can't get people to change, it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
But that's why I said I wish I had read this book, when it was written 15 years ago, because I've been part of organizations, nonprofit and profit, where if you realize what you can do to make a change, then everybody gets excited about it. And you actually look forward to the process instead of dreading change, which is what, most people do.
Yeah, exactly. It really does make me wonder statistically how many businesses, if they had taken this mentality of the importance of change, and mm-hmm. whether that's innovation or just adaptation or whatever, how many businesses would still be around if they had adapted that principle?
Right.
Especially, COVID is an easy example because we're in the midst of it, but just even thinking about, and I know that I had mentioned when we talked about unleashing the innovators, mm-hmm. Sears versus Nintendo, and the companies that adapt versus the ones that don't, and how many great, awesome, big companies as well as small companies would actually really benefit from adapting these principles and really embracing this idea of change, even though that is something that is so scary and very risk intensive.
Yep.
Being willing to take the risk, because in this parable with these penguins, they send scouts out because they don't know what's out there, but just at least sending scouts out to figure it out.
And the other thing too is most of these stories that we're talking about in the series, it relates to leadership, mm-hmm. right? And so if you've got leaders that are pliable, mm-hmm. and they're willing to listen to a wide range of people, and one of the other things I liked about this story, that I don't know they made a really big deal about it, but as I said, this team was very diverse. And so if you're part of a leadership group where everybody's exactly the same, you're in trouble, right? Because no one's going to come up with different ideas. Now, you may not be in trouble for a while if you're very mm-hmm. successful in those kind of things, but at some point, someone's going to come to you and say, hey, what we're doing is not right. And if everybody's on the same page, you're going to disagree with that person. And that person may be the person that could save your organization. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for leaders to be open-minded and to be willing to listen to people who think differently than they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you've kind of talked about how this applies in a lot of ways. Are there other particular ways that you've seen this applied throughout ADV in the midst? Because you've only been in business for 3 years, so hopefully the iceberg is not melting. But have there been instances and things and cases in which you've been able to use this, or that you've seen yourself use it?
I do, and one of the things I've had to learn is to not get defensive. And I would say that's a learned trait, because when I was your stage 30 years ago, if somebody confronted me, I almost always got defensive. It's like, what do you mean? I thought through this thing. And being someone who thinks a lot, it's very easy to get offended because I've really thought through the process. But that's one of the things I've tried to do with ADV is if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've got an idea that's different than what I think, I'm like, hey, let's talk about it. Maybe your idea is better than mine. So, we're in the early stages of this, but I've just been around leaders who are defensive, and I've been around leaders who aren't defensive. And the non-defensive leader creates this environment, this open door policy where you want to go talk to them, right? And so the problem is if the leader's defensive, then nobody's going to want to go talk to them. And so you rob yourself of those great ideas to make your organization grow and empower people to do things on their own. Once again, that was one of the things was number 5 was empower others to act.
Mm-hmm.
Great leaders empower people who are in their organization to go do things that they can't do themselves.
They're able to market ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly
able to
right.
share the vision. Love it.
Yep.
Any other final thoughts you want to share with our listeners / readers?
Yep. So the last thing that I wrote here was every leader is called upon to make changes in their organization. The hardest changes to make are in established organizations where the top brass are stuck in their ways and they're doing the same thing. And whether you're talking about politics, you're talking about church, you're talking about universities, you're talking about businesses, families maybe, okay? Any organization, and the organizations that are the most successful and have been around the longest are the hardest ones to change. So, my encouragement to you is if you're a younger organization, be pliable, build that into your culture. If you're an older organization, listen to your young people and their innovative ideas. And you have to weigh them and balance them because you can't do everything. But everything falls on leadership, right?
Yep. And
So.
leadership starts with you. So love that. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. This was a fun one. I don't know how many we have your parable that's going to be coming at some point.
We have another one too, but anyway.
Oh,
but
good,
we don't have
good.
any with penguins though.
No, I know this
is
one's
the
fun.
lone penguin.
This is very
novel.
exciting. Sweet. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. You can check us out on Instagram at Business by the Books. You can email us if you pick this book up or read any of our other books. Let us know your thoughts, experiences, and just your overall good opinions of the podcast. And that's businessbythebooks@gmail.com. And then you can also visit our website, businessbythebooks.com. So, sweet. You want to close us out?
I do.
Awesome.
Leaders are readers, and if you're not reading, you're not leading.
Thank you guys for listening, and we will talk to you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.